Before we dive into this episode, we wanted to take the opportunity to say a heartfelt thank you for being here. Whether you've been with us from the very beginning when we started this podcast in 2019 or you're new, welcome.
We hope you enjoy what you hear, and if you do, please download it, share it with friends, and leave a review. It really helps us get better guests and share the midlife love. In this episode, I'm flying solo, joined by one of the most respected voices in modern espionage fiction. Charles Cumming is the author of multiple critically acclaimed spy novels, including the Box 88 series, praised for their psychological depth, moral complexity, and unflinching realism. This conversation isn't just about spy stories, it's about how a writing career actually begins, what inspired Charles to start writing, how he landed an agent and a publishing deal, and what it really takes to sustain a career in a demanding creative field, including the long time it takes to bring stories to the big screen. We also explore his unique relationship with the intelligence world, including being approached by MI6 and how that experience shaped his understanding of secrecy, power, and responsibility. This is a fascinating conversation about craft, identity, and what it means to keep producing quality work over the long term. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors podcast with myself, James, flying solo today because we have a really special guest that I'm thrilled to have on board. But before we get into that, what have Claire and I been up to? Well, as you know, we're still in Ibiza. We launched our retreat dates. So our next retreat is happening, the Reset retreat, the first weekend in May, the first bank holiday in May. We only work with 8 people. We only have 6 spots left already. So if you're interested in that, get in touch with us in the usual ways. Other than that, just been easing ourselves into the year and doing some great networking, meeting some interesting people over here in Ibiza. I want to get straight onto our guest because it's a bit of a fanboy moment for me. I've read many of his books. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by best-selling author Charles Cumming, who's best known, I guess, for his espionage series, the Box 88 series, but other amazing books, The Spanish Game, A Foreign Country, lots and lots. Charles, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks for coming on. Let's get right to the start. What inspired you to write? Why fiction rather than journalism or non-fiction?
So writing was the thing that I could always do as a student, even when I was quite young. I was always able to kind of put one sentence in front of another and pass exams. I had a certain kind of fluency and also an interest in storytelling, weirdly more movies and TV than literature, if I'm honest, until I went to university. But it was always something that I had a kind of facility for. I had no brain for business. I had no kind of scientific mind to go into pharmaceuticals or the city or something like that. And yeah, there was always something kind of romantic to me about becoming a novelist, if I'm honest. And then I had a piece of luck. I went home for the weekend in about 1995 to stay the weekend with my mum and my late stepfather. And there was a man there who, long story short, had just retired from being an MI6 officer. And he and I got on quite well. And actually during the dinner, this will give you the date precisely, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. So we all went up from dinner and watched this awful news on the TV. And yeah, he put me up for a job with SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service, better known as MI6. And I did various interviews and jumped through various hoops. And people who've read my book, A Spy by Nature, would recognize, the front third of that novel is basically an account of what happened to me. But I didn't get in, although a lot of people think that I did. But I sort of had enough of an exposure to that world and a fascination with that world that the sort of, and also I was intrigued by what would have happened to me had I got in, or had I. They also sort of, it sort of gingerly fashion suggested that I could try for MI5. So what would have happened to me if I'd pursued that path?
Wow.
So I created Alec Milius, who's a sort of fairly malign avatar of me, and not malign, but he's a bit of a mess, broken reed, and that was me. That was me. I was off, and it was a time when spy fiction was sort of on its knees, really, because this is post-Soviet. So the end of the Cold War, as it were. So people weren't really publishing or writing spy novels, except really John le Carré. So also, obviously, it's before 9/11. But I managed to sell the book and get a 2-book deal, and then I was up and running.
Oh, wow, fantastic! And was that the first full book that you wrote that you managed to get a publishing deal for, or had you had some starts before that didn't go anywhere?
No, I wrote it on spec, and it was the first full-length novel I'd ever attempted. And I was lucky again. I had a friend who was an assistant to quite a powerful literary agent in London. And she had just been sort of given her wings, as it were, to go and build her own client list and become an agent in her own right. And so I told her at a party, "Hey, I've written a novel." And she said, "Well, send it to me." And she liked A Spy by Nature, and she took me on, and she sold it to Penguin.
Oh, amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, it was lucky.
Yeah. Well, no, and talent as well, Charles. But it's great. There's a series of circumstances. You met this guy when you went home from MI6, and it kind of sparked your interest in that world. And then,
yeah. No, but it's I don't want to be too hard on myself, but the fact of it is that a lot of it was linked to the sort of the education that I'd had, a kind of quite a privileged upbringing. I was at Eton as a pupil. The guy who came to dinner at my stepfather's house had been to Eton. My stepfather had been to Eton. It was a little bit of a kind of old boy network thing. The Foreign Office loves old Etonians. Yeah. Well, they did back then. And I knew this woman, this literary agent, because she was the girlfriend of a friend of mine who I'd been at school with. So the whole thing is quite, there's a lot of built-in privilege there, which might not have been available to somebody who had a similar talent. I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
But there's also not much I can do about it. It was just, that was my luck,
Yeah, fantastic. And did you have any other careers pre-writing, or was it pretty much that book got sold and then you were up and running as a writer? Did you consider anything else?
No, I sort of always
apart from MI6.
Yeah. I always wanted to write. I think when I was much younger, I wanted to be a movie director, but I didn't have the sort of visual talent, the image forming talent to do that particularly well. I was interested in the theatre, but no, the only proper job I'd had was working for a magazine called The Week, which is still going. Mm-hmm. I was in at the beginning with The Week, and I wrote the film page and the sports page for years and years and years there, and that allowed me to be a novelist, as it were, on the side. So when I wasn't working at The Week, I was writing my first, I guess, 7 novels. So it was the perfect job for my sideline as a novelist, as it were, because the fact of the matter is, this is very much the case today, it's exceptionally difficult to make a living purely as a novelist, unless you're very successful, sort of Richard Osman or Robert Harris or those sorts of writers, or you have a huge breakout bestseller in your debut. You need another job. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. And I guess
sorry.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. Actually, I was going to ask you about that, the publishing world, because I think, our audience are midlifers, and I think it's one of those cliches, isn't it? Everyone thinks they've got a book in them, but actually producing it is one thing. That's quite a big task in itself. And then actually getting it out there into the world is the next step. And can you give us an insight as to how the publishing world works?
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say that again?
Can you give us maybe just an insight into how the publishing world works? It's quite, I'm sure people think like, oh, well, you've got loads of books, they sell really well, that must be very, very lucrative. But actually the reality is, on a paperback that's sold in Waterstones, you're only getting a fraction of that back, aren't you?
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think if you're working in genre, so if you're a crime writer, you're writing detective fiction or romance or spy, and you work very hard and very quickly. So in other words, you're writing a novel every year, which I never have done. I've never been kind of high functioning enough, or I'm frankly too lazy to do that. And I like to sort of take my time. But if you did write a book every year, which is what they encourage, then yes, you could sell, let's say, 50, 60, 70,000 paperbacks every year, and you'd be making a good living. But you'd be making a good living in the same way that a doctor makes a good living, or accountant makes a good living. You're not going to be buying a yacht anytime soon. But the way that it works is, a publisher will typically have 4 or 5 novels that they're publishing every month. So let's say you're being published by Penguin Random House. They'll have 4 or 5 at least crime novels, spy thrillers, so forth, psychological thrillers, and I always think of it. You get anointed. So if they think that Susan's book is the one that's really going to do well in this quarter, all of the marketing spend and the PR and the time and the attention and the sales effort will be directed at her book. And the other 4 or 5 novelists will, potentially sort of fall by the wayside, and they'll just sort of throw it at the wall and see what sticks, Or you have a marquee name, a big name like a Richard Osman or Robert Harris, who sort of generate their own sales because they have a huge readership, but also generate their own PR because they're on the radio or they're on TV or they have a huge social media reach, or they're just, for want of a better word, they're famous. So they will sell based on reputation and the pleasure they've given readers in their previous work.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could write what's called a literary novel. So, like a kind of 17th century story set in Tuscany. And it's beautifully written, and you might get, if you're lucky, you might get £10,000 for it.
Yeah.
So that's all in. So that's the years that you took writing it, and then waiting a year for it to be published, and then you get a little bit of that money when it is published, and then a little bit more when it's in paperback. So let's say it's a 5-year cycle, 10,000 quid. It is, you're halving it already, agents' fees and tax. So it's 5. It's basically £1,000 a year over 5 years. So it's nothing. It's really nothing. Yeah. So you need to, first of all, you need to have another job, and you also need to have good fortune with sales primarily, and also with TV and film. If your book can be turned into a successful TV series or a movie, then of course you're going to benefit from that.
Now, speaking of movies, you worked on a movie, didn't you, recently with Gerard Butler, with the aeroplane crashing?
Yeah. Well,
how did that come about?
So this is, I guess, about 10 years ago. So we're it's 2026 now. 2015, 2016, I flew with my then quite young children to a place called Hurghada in Egypt. So just for what the travel industry calls a hot flop. We were going to a hotel to sit by the pool, for a week. And it was at the time that ISIS were, chopping people's heads off, and there's sort of appalling campaign of violence in Syria and Iraq, and also obviously terrorist activities all over the world. And I had this thought as our plane came into Hurghada: what would happen if we'd been diverted by bad weather or some hijack or whatever into Syria, and we'd landed in a place that was under the control of ISIS. This is how my mind worked, right? And at the time, I had a manager and an agent in Los Angeles for screenwriting, and I thought this is a great idea for a film. And so I went to LA and I hired a car and I drove around for 10 days, and twice a day, morning and afternoon, I pitched this idea, this story about a plane that comes down in Syria in bad weather to all the great and the good in the sort of Hollywood firmament. And yeah, long story short, it was bought by a producer and they paid me to write it. And then somebody else took it over and set it in the Congo. And then Gerald Butler attached, and they moved the action to the Philippines. And then another director came on board, and then Gerald Butler left, and then Gerald Butler came back. Anyway, after about whatever it was, 5, 6, 7 years of this, brilliantly, at the end of the pandemic, they shot the film, Plane, it's called. And it did really well.
Great movie.
So yeah, it's really fun. It's a good kind of beer and pizza movie.
Yeah.
It's not the Red Shoes, but it's good. It's a really good action thriller in a kind of old-fashioned way, and it was very well done by Jean-Francois Richet is the director, and Butler is just he's a movie star. He's fabulous. And the thing they ramped up that wasn't really in my original script was the kind of buddy relationship with Mike Coulter, which it worked very well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the story of that. The frustration was because it was the pandemic, I couldn't go on set, so I couldn't go to
Oh no.
Costa Rica, as they call it. It may have been a blessing in disguise because apparently the humidity was around about sort of 87%, and you could hardly move. But I would love to have gone on set and seen it all happen, but it wasn't to be.
Oh, your first movie, and you couldn't go and watch it. Oh,
yeah.
I've got to ask, if you're allowed to say, your books would translate really well to films. Is there anything in the pipeline for any of your books to make it onto the screen?
Yeah, no, it's funny. Actually, this morning in the last few weeks, I've been working on an adaptation of A Spy by Nature, the novel I was talking to you about, my first novel, which has been in what they call development hell for the best part of 15, 16 years. And the producers have now handed me the keys to the kingdom. And so I'm writing it myself, and hoping to try and get that into production later this year or next year. There's a really good young up and coming actor attached to play Alec Milius, who I think would just be perfect. Hoping he doesn't get so famous that we had two situations with Spy by Nature. Donald Gleeson, the young Irish actor, well, not so young anymore, many years ago attached to play Alec Milius, and then he was offered Star Wars, so he went off and did Star Wars. And then Paul Mescal more recently attached to play Alec Milius, and then he was offered Gladiator 2, so he left. So we're just hoping that this I'm not even going to mention his name, but this up and coming hot young actor doesn't get offered Star Trek New Horizon or something.
Yeah.
Or Avatar 5.
It's amazing. I mean, what I'm really hearing here is that whole creative process is, I think, probably a lot more extended than people would think. I guess for you, if you're writing a book in a year, that's your part. But then it goes to editors, then the publishing house have to design their marketing strategy around it. So that in itself comes on them. For film, you're talking about 10 years to bring it to screen, 16 years to bring it to screen. It's really, really long time.
With novels, because the stakes are kind of lower because there's much less money involved, really. So so you only really have a relationship with your literary agent, who's sort of in charge of making your career run on the right tracks and talking to publishers and working out your contracts for you. And then you have conversations with your editor, and that's sort of it, really. And then the marketing and the PR and everything else is kind of left up to the publisher to sort of get that right, as it were. Whereas with movies, there's so many moving parts, and frankly, so many more egos, and some very smart people, directors and writers and the producers, and they all have to have their say, as well as the broadcaster, the studio, the channel, and so forth. So you lose control of screenwriting much faster than you lose control of your novel, because there's just, with a novel, there's really nobody apart from your sort of imaginary friend who's getting involved in it.
Yeah. No, I get that. I actually had in London, we live around Belsize Park, and we had a few years ago, they were shooting one of those super hit, I think it was called The Eternals or something. But they took an entire section of Belsize Park, redecorated all the shop fronts. It probably was 2 weeks of a full film crew. It was for one scene with one actress, and apparently she just didn't turn up on the day. So then they decided just to cut that scene. And you're thinking, well, that's why these things cost millions of dollars, right? Because just the cost of putting just that tiny, I think it was meant to be like a minute of screen time, and ended up not shooting it or doing it. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's really terrifying, the money that is spent, and building the sets and the sheer number of people who are on set being paid whatever it is they're being paid. I guess that's one of the reasons why they shoot so much stuff in sort of places like Hungary, because there's not just a sort of tax break, but the local crew is cheaper to hire cheaper to insure than they are in California or London.
I'd love to ask about your writing process, but before that, I'm sure people will be curious about, you referenced there, being approached by MI6 and A Spy by Nature. That's slightly autobiographical, but for people who haven't read it, can you tell us a little bit about what that process was like? Bits you're allowed to share?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much allowed to share all of it, because nothing, as I said, I never worked for them. and I've talked about it fairly sort of relentlessly for the last 25 years. But it was really what MI6 is looking for, what they were looking for. This is in the sort of pre-digital age, if you like. Uh, um, People who are. It's a relationship game. It's not like it is in the movies. It's not like killing people and SWAT teams and all the rest of it. It's not James Bond or Jason Bourne. I mean, really, what an intelligence officer does is he is told by his superiors to find out information about a particular thing, and to go off and using whatever legal means he or she can to obtain that information. So it's really it's a relationship business. It's about employing people who you think will be able to persuade individuals who have access to those secrets to part with them, either for ideological reasons or for financial reasons or for reasons of ego or whatever it is that's going to motivate them to do that. So this may actually, to go back to what I was saying about public school boys, that there is something about the experience of being sent away to boarding school at the age of 8, which does breed a certain sort of uniqueness of temperament when it comes to being able to survive on your own and put on a mask and pretend to be somebody that you are not in order to thrive or survive in that environment. But it also teaches you a kind of a pleasantness of manner, I guess, so that you're able to go into really any environment, whether it's an embassy or a pub, and talk to people and draw them out and build a relationship with them. So that's sort of what they were looking for, certainly with me. Nowadays it's different because the threats are Chinese, they're Iranian, they're Russian, they are Islamist, and so you want to put somebody into into a ministry in Beijing or Moscow, then they're going to either have to look Chinese or speak fluent Russian or be a Persian, a British Persian who can pretend to be Iranian, etc., etc. And there's not much use anymore for white 6'6" Aldertonians. I'm sure they're still employing them, but you see fewer and fewer of them.
I'm sure. I would also ask, before we get into your writing process, at the start you were talking about when you started writing, it was kind of that post-Cold War, pre-9/11, and I guess espionage thrillers were in a bit of a downward trend. But I think recently we've seen a real uptick again in things like Le Carre and Forsyth coming to the fore again, and works like your own. Do you think we're seeing that kind of more cerebrally led thrillers coming back in the espionage genre, maybe away from we had all those, I guess, Andy McNab style action thrillers for a while, didn't we?
Yeah. It's interesting that it does seem to be a trend at the moment for, as you say, more cerebral, more literary spy fiction. A lot of it's coming from America. There's a very good former CIA officer called Ilana Berry, who writes under the name I.S. Berry, who had I think her first novel was called The Peacock and the Sparrow, published here. Very good book. And everyone's sort of waiting for her second novel. And then obviously David McCloskey, who wrote Damascus Station, who was a CIA analyst in Syria when the Assad regime was sort of in that kind of post-Arab Spring period. And he seems to write a novel every 3 months. He's amazingly productive, but they're very good. He's keeping up a standard. Paul Vidic is another American who's writing in that Le Carre tradition. Novels of temperament and character and relationships and the psychological pressures of espionage, as opposed to the more Andy McNab stuff that you're talking about, where it's like, let's go and slot somebody. But Le Carre is sort of unique because he obviously didn't invent the genre, but he really was the sort of totemic figure for his whole writing life. So that's from basically the early 1960s till his death 5 years ago. And he was publishing a novel pretty much every 2-3 years, as well as having sometimes really fantastic film and television adaptations. And now his son is writing kind of under his name, as it were, and continuing the family business and doing it very well. Nick Harkaway with Carla's Choice. So I don't think Le Carre is going out of fashion anytime soon. I've got The Night Managers on TV right now, season 2.
Yeah.
But the thing that really changed everything was 9/11 and Putin, and they both happened right about the same time. Putin coming to power in Russia in 2000 and trying to sort of roll back the sort of post-Cold War era, which is obviously what he's doing with Ukraine and Moldova and all the rest of it. And then obviously the horrors of 9/11 and Al Qaeda and then ISIS and so forth. That gave spy novelists, several new subjects to really dig into. And then the other massive change is technological. So what the mobile phone has done to intelligence work, in the sense that you can be followed, you can be listened to, you can be tracked, you can look up any piece of information you want on your phone, and ChatGPT will tell you the answer in 10 seconds. All of that stuff obviously just did not exist in the 90s and before the Cold War era. So there's been lots of interesting material to mine. What's quite interesting actually is that I was talking about Ilana Berry. Her novel takes place in a sort of the early 2000s, as opposed to the present day. So the tech is not quite where it is now. I mean, AI surveillance is a kind of another massive game changer in espionage. My new novel's coming out in July, Icarus 17. Is about a young couple on the run and how impossible it is to disguise your appearance, to go on the run, to vanish, if you're being hunted by people who have access to mobile phone technology, CCTV, anything like that. You show your face on a camera and it goes in the cloud, they will find you. It's as simple as that, unless you go and live in sort of Peru or something.
I was going to ask, how much of a challenge is it as a writer to kind of keep abreast of that technology when you're writing in the present day? Because it moves so fast.
Yeah, it's tricky. The other danger is that you can get out of date quite fast. If you read a Spy by Nature now, it's like a Jane Austen novel. In terms of like it's pre-Google Spy by Nature.
Yeah.
I tend to do it the other way around. So I want to tell a story. Let's say with Icarus, I wanted to tell a story about these two kids going on the run in Greece, and then what would that look like if they were trying to do that? And then it's a question of finding people, talking to people who can tell me what capabilities the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, the Brits have when it comes to hunting you down to your eyrie in Ibiza. They put about 25 minutes.
I'm sure. Probably.
I mean, for example, like you're on screen now. If they were looking for you and your face had been put into the AI, look for this man. Even with your glasses on, even with the earpiece and so forth, this is going out on Zooms. It would just you'd already have a SWAT team at your door in the time that we've been speaking. It's terrifying.
It is terrifying, isn't it? Really terrifying. Let's talk a little bit about your writing process. How does that work? Do you start with the character, the plot, and then in terms of do you sit down every day and go, right, I'm going to write for a certain time or a certain word length? How's that work?
I'm not as high functioning or as disciplined as someone like David McCloskey, by the sound of it, because he's working extremely efficiently. Or Anthony Horowitz, I know a little bit. He's probably written a novel in the time that you and I have been speaking. Like he really. So I'm slower than that, but I do turn up. I come into my little shed in here in London, and I'll start work around 9:30, and I'll go through as long as it takes, really, till sort of till it's time to make dinner or eat dinner. Obviously, get for lunch, and I'll go for a walk. And I'm 54 now, and I was always kind of blessed, if you like, with I was always quite kind of slim, but also physically very idle. But I've now realized that I'm getting less slim and older, so I've started going to the gym, and I've got a personal trainer, and that's been very good for mental health and physical well-being. I got two young kids, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and just lifting them up as a 50-year-old was testing. So now, but now I've got myself sorted out, so I'm a little stronger, and that's helped with my kind of daily routine, as it were.
Yeah. Okay, so you're writing all day, and do you tend to just let the words go and you finish and then come back and edit, or do you kind of edit as you're writing?
I edit as I'm writing, so it's sort of it's a little bit like 3 steps forward and 2 steps back.
Right.
I mean, there were a lot of days with Icarus where I was able to do kind of nothing. There was just no inspiration, or I was going back to rewriting other stuff, or the story wasn't going in the way that I wanted it to. And that always is the case with all the books that I've written. I don't find it easy. I think Len Dayton said the best thing about being a novelist is meeting some pretty girl at a party and telling her that you're a novelist. The worst thing about being a novelist is actually sitting down and writing the novel. So I kind of, I can see where Len was coming from. But no, I treat it as an office job. I treat it as a Monday to Friday, basically 9 to 5, 9 to 6. But the beauty of it is that if I want to take the day off, if I want to take a break from it, I don't have somebody saying to me, "Get back to your desk." I can.
The time is your own.
Yeah, my time is my own. And then, but the downside of it is, and this I've become increasingly aware of this over the last few years. You don't get out much. You have no colleagues. You have no kind of water cooler gossip. It is it's not lonely, but it is solitary. And I think a lot of people, you were mentioning before, a lot of people say, I want to write a novel, I want to write a book. And I mean, writing one is you've written a book too, right?
Yes.
So
I wrote a non-fiction.
Yeah. So this, but it's it is very time consuming, and the first one is quite exciting and interesting. But then you've got to do it again, and then you've got to do it again, and you've got to do it again. And it can be a little bit of a kind of Groundhog Day.
Yes.
Suddenly you turn around, you've written 13 books and you're 54. And like, when did that happen? Because there's nothing really to kind of measure your career progress, as it were. Because you have highs and you have great lows, and some books sell very well and some books don't sell at all. And so it's a curious way of making a living, I'd say.
Oh, this has been fascinating. I could talk to you for ages, but what's next for you? You mentioned the next book, Icarus
17. So
when's that coming out?
The Box 88 books is planned as a sort of sequence of 7 novels about Lachlan Kite, who is when we first meet him in the first book, Box 88, he's an 18-year-old kid who's recruited into this Anglo-American intelligence service, which kind of operates without government oversight. And the sort of USP of the series, if you like, is that you follow young Kite through the 1990s as a young spy in the pre-digital age, in that decade that the spy novel forgot, really. So post collapse of the Soviet Union and going through the Rwandan genocide and the Oklahoma bombing and the rise of Al Qaeda and Putin, and then you see him in the present day, sometimes often dealing with the aftermath of those operations 20 years later as a man of my age.
Yeah.
So the 4th book, Icarus 17, is coming out in July, and it's a continuation of the saga, if you like.
Brilliant, fantastic. And if people wanted to find out more about you and more about your books, where could they go to?
Best place is Instagram, I'd say. Charles Cumming Books.
Okay.
That's where I'm sort of most active. I do have a website, but it's pretty moribund. And I really loathe Elon Musk, so I don't want to encourage anybody to go to X.
Fair enough.
So yeah, Charles Cumming Books on Instagram is the best place to find me.
Okay, we'll put that in the show notes. Charles, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure and fascinating.
No, well, thanks for supporting the book. So I'm very glad that you've been reading them. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you. So drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors.
Yeah. What?
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. And don't forget to take the Midlife Reset audit now to receive personalised insights into what's holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife. So go ahead and take the audit now at themidlifementors.com/audit.